The cry for help, 5 to 7 minute hook. The galaxy was a vast and dangerous place. Civilizations rose and fell, and countless species fought for survival. But there was one race that had always remained peaceful, known for their kindness and wisdom. They were the Exenari, an alien species from a beautiful world, far from the reach of most galactic conflicts. Their planet, lush and vibrant, was a symbol of harmony. But that peace was now shattered. A powerful enemy, unknown and ruthless, had descended upon the Exenari homeworld. The invaders, with their advanced weapons and relentless armies, began to destroy everything in their path. Exenari cities were reduced to rubble, their once thriving planet now a war zone. Their peaceful ways left them unprepared for such violence. As their world crumbled, the Exenari realized they had no choice but to reach out for help. But who could help them now? The Exenari had never been warriors, and no one in the galaxy seemed to care about their plight. For weeks, they tried everything, sending out distress signals to their neighbors, to the Galactic Council, even to distant star systems. But all they received in return was silence. No one came. No one cared. Desperation filled the air. Their last hope was to send a final message, one that they never thought they would need to send. A message to the Deathworlders, a race known for their terrifying strength, brutal tactics, and fierce warriors. It was said that the Deathworlders never intervened in conflicts unless they were personally threatened, or the situation seemed like something they could conquer. As the Exenari leaders sat in their ruined command center, they debated whether it was worth it. Would the Deathworlders even respond? Or would they dismiss them as another weak race that didn't deserve their attention? With no time left, they made the decision. They would send the call. They would beg for help. The message was simple. Help us. Our world is dying. We need your strength. Please, come to our aid before it's too late. The signal was broadcasted across the galaxy, using all available frequencies, hoping against hope that someone, anyone, would hear it. The hours passed in silence. The destruction continued outside. It seemed as if all hope was lost. And then something incredible happened. The signal, which had gone unnoticed for so long, finally reached an unexpected place. Far across the galaxy, in the darkest corners where few dared to go, the Deathworlders heard it. At the heart of their fortress, General Korath, the legendary leader of the Deathworlders, stood over a holographic map of the galaxy. His crew, a group of the most ruthless warriors known to the stars, sat silently in the background, watching their leader's every move. They had been preparing for something big, something dark. But they never expected to be called upon by another species. Korath's eyes narrowed as the message played. He listened carefully, as the Exenari leader's voice cracked with desperation. Help us, please. We need you. A slow, grim smile spread across Korath's face. For years, the Deathworlders had remained in the shadows, never directly involved in galactic matters. But this was different. This was an opportunity to show their true power. He turned to his second-in-command, Captain Rydler, who was waiting for his orders. Prepare the fleet. We leave in the morning, Korath commanded. His voice was calm, but filled with a fierce certainty. The Exenari have made the right choice. They know they can't fight alone. Now, they'll learn what it means to have Deathworlders on their side. Rylor hesitated for a moment, knowing that the Deathworlders' intervention in this war would not go unnoticed. Many in the galaxy feared the Deathworlders. They were known for their brutal strategies and overwhelming force. Some even believed that they were more dangerous than the enemy that had invaded the Exenari's world. But Korath had made his decision, and Rylor knew better than to argue. The call had been heard. And now, the Deathworlders were coming. Meanwhile, back on the Exenari homeworld, panic was setting in. The invaders were getting closer. Their ships filled the sky, casting a shadow over the cities below. The ground trembled as bombs fell, and the air was thick with smoke. The Exenari, fragile and scared, huddled together in underground shelters, praying that their call for help had not been in vain. The leaders of the Xenari waited in silence, each hoping that the Deathworlders would keep their promise. But the hours dragged on. The message had been sent, but no word had come back. Would the Deathworlders arrive in time, or would their world fall completely to the invaders? Minutes turned to hours. Finally, just as hope seemed to flicker out, the sound of powerful engines roared through the atmosphere. The sky lit up as ships, massive and imposing, dropped from the stars above. The ground shook beneath the force of their landing. The Deathworlder fleet had arrived. For the Xenari, it was a moment of shock and awe. They had seen nothing like this before. The Deathworlder ships, black as night and sleek like hunting beasts, settled down across the planet's surface, and from those ships emerged warriors, the Deathworlders. With each step, they sent a wave of terror across the Xenari, but also a wave of relief. The Deathworlders had come. As the troops unloaded, General Korath's voice boomed through the communication channels, reaching every corner of the Xenari world. "This world is under our protection now," he said. His words were clear, strong, and full of purpose. "Prepare yourselves. The battle is not over, but you are no longer alone." The Xenari leaders, who had feared the Deathworlders, now felt a strange sense of hope. The invaders would be stopped. The Deathworlders would show them what real strength meant. But the real question remained: could the Deathworlders, with all their might, defeat the unknown enemy? Or would they, too, be swept away in the storm that threatened to destroy everything? The next few hours would decide their fate. The Deathworlders' arrival. The ground trembled as the first wave of Deathworlder ships touched down on the Xenari homeworld. Massive, black ships, sleek and fearsome, created shockwaves in the air as their engines powered down. The once peaceful planet, already suffering from the violent assault of unknown invaders, was now witness to an arrival that would change everything. The Deathworlders had arrived, and their mere presence sent a wave of hope and fear rippling through the Xenari people. The Xenari leaders, who had been watching from their underground command center, stared in awe at the ships that had descended from the heavens. It was as if the darkness of their world had suddenly been lit up by the harsh glow of reality. The Deathworlders, known throughout the galaxy for their brutal strength and unrelenting combat strategies, were now on their soil. But would they be enough to save them? General Korath, the leader of the Deathworlder forces, stood tall as he surveyed the landscape. His eyes, cold and calculating, took in the ruins of Xenari cities. Buildings, once towering with elegant beauty, were now reduced to rubble. The sounds of distant explosions echoed through the air, but none of that fazed Korath. The Deathworlders didn't flinch at destruction. They thrived in it. "Ready the troops," Korath commanded, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. His soldiers, battle-hardened and ruthless, moved quickly, knowing that this would be no ordinary rescue mission. They were not here to help the Xenari rebuild their world. They were here to bring down their enemies with overwhelming force. As the Deathworlder troops moved out of their ships, their black armor gleaming under the faint light of the planet's dying sun, the Xenari leaders felt a strange mix of fear and gratitude. They knew the Deathworlders were capable of saving their world, but they also understood that the cost of such salvation could be high. The Deathworlders were not merciful. They would fight to win, and that meant that the invaders would be annihilated. In the ruins of the city, Xenari civilians peeked out from their hiding spots, watching the soldiers march in formation. For the first time in days, the terrified people dared to hope. The invaders might be vicious, but they had never seen anything like the Deathworlders. Far in the distance, explosions continued to rock the planet's surface. The invaders were not waiting around. They had already begun advancing toward the city center. Knowing the Xenari were on the brink of collapse, it was clear that they thought victory was certain. But they hadn't counted on the Deathworlders. Korath's forces quickly took positions, spread out across the city's perimeter. They didn't speak much to the Xenari. There was no need for pleasantries or reassurances. The Deathworlders had one goal: to destroy the enemy, and they didn't waste time with anything else. The plan was simple but effective. Encircle the enemy, strike quickly, and hit them with overwhelming force. As the first Deathworlder unit made contact with the invaders, chaos erupted. The Exenari washed from their shelters, hearts pounding as they witnessed the might of the Deathworlders for the first time. The invaders, though technologically advanced, were no match for the sheer brutality of the Deathworlder tactics. Koreth, leading from the front, issued a series of commands that were instantly followed by his soldiers. The Deathworlders moved like a single unit, every soldier knowing their part and executing it flawlessly. They were a well-oiled machine, each movement deliberate, each strike deadly. No hesitation, no mercy. The invaders, despite their advanced technology, were overwhelmed by the sheer ferocity of the Deathworlder assault. Their weapons, while powerful, couldn't match the devastating efficiency of the Deathworlder's close combat. Every Deathworlder soldier was a master of war, trained for a lifetime to fight with deadly precision. The first wave of invaders fell back, their forces in disarray. But Koreth knew this was just the beginning. The invaders would regroup, and they would fight back with everything they had. But that was exactly what the Deathworlders wanted. "They're not finished," Koreth muttered to himself as he watched the enemy retreat. "But we will finish them." He turned to Captain Ryler, his second-in-command, who had been silently observing the battle. "Prepare the second wave, and tell the Exenari to stay out of our way. This will be over soon." Ryler nodded, understanding that the Deathworlders' method of warfare was unlike anything the Exenari had ever seen. The Deathworlders didn't just fight, they conquered. And once they began, there would be no turning back. Meanwhile, the Exenari leaders, watching from their command center, couldn't help but feel a strange sense of awe. The Deathworlders were ruthless, yes, but they were the only chance the Exenari had for survival. If they didn't succeed, the Exenari would be wiped out. But the Deathworlders weren't just fighting for the Exenari. They were fighting because it was in their nature to win. The galaxy knew this truth. The Deathworlders never lost. In the streets of the ruined cities, the Exenari civilians began to feel a spark of hope. The Deathworlders were doing what they had promised. They were fighting for them, and they were fighting with a fury that only the Deathworlders could deliver. But as the battle raged on, one question remained. Would the Deathworlders' strength be enough to end the war? Or was there a force behind the invaders that even the Deathworlders couldn't overcome? Only time would tell, and the battle had just begun. The turning tide. As the second wave of Deathworlder forces descended upon the enemy's position, the Exenari could only watch in awe. What had started as a desperate plea for help had now become a display of absolute power. The invaders, stunned by the ferocity of the Deathworlder counterattack, were scrambling to reorganize. But it was too late. The Deathworlders had already gained the upper hand. Koreth stood at the edge of the battlefield, his arms crossed, eyes scanning the enemy lines. His soldiers were relentless, charging forward with precision and brutality. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts, just pure, unbridled war. His heart raced, not from fear, but from the thrill of battle. For the Deathworlders, war wasn't just about survival, it was about domination. On the front lines, the Deathworlders moved like shadows, their dark armor nearly blending with the night. Their weapons hummed with deadly energy as they tore through the invaders' defenses. Every strike was a calculated blow, designed to break the enemy's resolve. They weren't just killing, they were sending a message. No one stands against the Deathworlders. As the battle raged, General Koreth received a transmission from the Exenari leadership. It was the High Council, and their voices were thick with emotion, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. General Koreth, the leader of the Exenari, said, his voice trembling, We never expected this. You're saving us. We owe you everything." Koreth's face remained impassive. He didn't fight for thanks. He fought because it was in his blood, in the blood of every Deathworlder who had ever lived. His people were warriors, and warriors fought to win. But the Ixanari needed more than words. They needed results. "We're not done yet," Korath said firmly. "Prepare your people for the final push. The invaders won't retreat until their commanders are destroyed." The transmission cut off, and Korath turned back to the battle. His soldiers were now pushing deeper into the invaders' ranks. The enemy was beginning to break, their lines faltering under the weight of the Deathworlders' assault. But there was still resistance. The invaders were desperate, and desperation made them dangerous. Korath's mind raced as he assessed the situation. The invaders were regrouping at the central command post, an old military complex at the heart of the city. If they could hold that position, they could turn the tide of the war. Korath knew they couldn't allow that to happen. He quickly relayed orders to his forces. "Push forward. We take the command center. No mercy." The Deathworlder forces surged ahead, cutting through the enemy like a storm tearing through a flimsy shelter. The invaders, realizing they were losing control, began to scatter. But it was futile. The Deathworlders' assault was too much. Each step they took was a step closer to victory. In the heart of the enemy command center, the invader general, an imposing figure clad in advanced armor, watched the situation unfold. His soldiers were falling back, and his once immovable defenses were crumbling. He cursed under his breath. The Deathworlders were relentless. They were unlike anything he had ever faced. "Reinforcements," the invader general barked, slamming his fist against the console. "We need reinforcements now." But no reinforcements came. The Deathworlders were cutting off their escape routes, closing in on all sides. In the chaos of the battle, one of Korath's elite soldiers, Captain Rylor, led a small squad into the command center. Their mission was clear: destroy the invader general and break the heart of their resistance. Rylor's eyes glinted with deadly focus as he and his team stormed through the entrance. "Move, move," Rylor shouted, his voice a harsh command. They encountered resistance almost immediately. A dozen enemy soldiers, panicked but still armed with powerful energy weapons, tried to stop them. But Rylor's squad was not just any group of soldiers. They were Deathworlders, and they had no equal. Rylor moved like a blur, his weapons slicing through the air with deadly precision. In moments, the room was cleared. The enemy soldiers were either dead or retreating. Only the invader general remained, cowering behind a barricade, his breathing heavy, his mind racing. The turning tide. As the second wave of Deathworlder forces descended upon the enemy's position, the Ixanari could only watch in awe. What had started as a desperate plea for help had now become a display of absolute power. The invaders, stunned by the ferocity of the Deathworlder counterattack, were scrambling to reorganize. But it was too late. The Deathworlders had already gained the upper hand. Korath stood at the edge of the battlefield, his arms crossed, eyes scanning the enemy lines. His soldiers were relentless, charging forward with precision and brutality. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts, just pure, unbridled war. His heart raced, not from fear, but from the thrill of battle. For the Deathworlders, war wasn't just about survival. It was about domination. On the front lines, the Deathworlders moved like shadows, their dark armor nearly blending with the night. Their weapons hummed with deadly energy as they tore through the invaders' defenses. Every strike was a calculated blow, designed to break the enemy's resolve. They weren't just killing. They were sending a message. No one stands against the Deathworlders. As the battle raged, General Korath received a transmission from the Ixanari leadership. It was the High Council, and their voices were thick with emotion, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. General Korath, the leader of the Ixanari, said, his voice trembling, We never expected this. You're saving us. We owe you everything." Korath's face remained impassive. He didn't fight for thanks. He fought because it was in his blood, in the blood of every Deathworlder who had ever lived. His people were warriors, and warriors fought to win. But the Exenari needed more than words. They needed results. "We're not done yet," Korath said firmly. "Prepare your people for the final push. The invaders won't retreat until their commanders are destroyed." The transmission cut off, and Korath turned back to the battle. His soldiers were now pushing deeper into the invaders' ranks. The enemy was beginning to break, their lines faltering under the weight of the Deathworlder's assault. But there was still resistance. The invaders were desperate, and desperation made them dangerous. Korath's mind raced as he assessed the situation. The invaders were regrouping at the central command post, an old military complex at the heart of the city. If they could hold that position, they could turn the tide of the war. Korath knew they couldn't allow that to happen. He quickly relayed orders to his forces. "Push forward. We take the command center. No mercy." The Deathworlder forces surged ahead, cutting through the enemy like a storm tearing through a flimsy shelter. The invaders, realizing they were losing control, began to scatter. But it was futile. The Deathworlder's assault was too much. Each step they took was a step closer to victory. In the heart of the enemy command center, the invader general, an imposing figure clad in advanced armor, watched the situation unfold. His soldiers were falling back, and his once immovable defenses were crumbling. He cursed under his breath. The Deathworlders were relentless. They were unlike anything he had ever faced. "Reinforcements," the invader general barked, slamming his fist against the console. "We need reinforcements now." But no reinforcements came. The Deathworlders were cutting off their escape routes, closing in on all sides. In the chaos of the battle, one of Korath's elite soldiers, Captain Rylor, led a small squad into the command center. Their mission was clear: destroy the invader general and break the heart of their resistance. Rylor's eyes glinted with deadly focus as he and his team stormed through the entrance. "Move, move," Rylor shouted, his voice a harsh command. They encountered resistance almost immediately. A dozen enemy soldiers, panicked but still armed with powerful energy weapons, tried to stop them. But Rylor's squad was not just any group of soldiers. They were Deathworlders, and they had no equal. Rylor moved like a blur, his weapon slicing through the air with deadly precision. In moments, the room was cleared. The enemy soldiers were either dead or retreating. Only the invader general remained, cowering behind a barricade, his breathing heavy, his mind racing. "Your war is over," Rylor said coldly as he advanced. His voice was calm, but the promise of death in his tone was unmistakable. The invader general raised his weapon in a last-ditch attempt to defend himself, but it was no use. Rylor's squad was upon him in an instant, disarming him and taking him down with brutal efficiency. Within moments, the invader general was captured. The battle for the command center was over. Korath arrived at the scene just as the general was being hauled away. The Deathworlder general surveyed the destruction around him. The invaders had been crushed, their command structure broken. The war was far from over, but the Exenari had won their first victory, and it had been delivered by the Deathworlders. Korath turned to the captured invader general. "Tell your people," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a threat. "The Deathworlders are here, and we don't lose." As the invader general was dragged away, Korath knew the battle was turning in their favor, but the war was far from over. The invaders might have lost their command center, but there were still countless soldiers in the field. They would fight to the last man. The Deathworlders were prepared for that, and they would not stop until every last invader was destroyed. The cost of victory. The war was over. The invaders had been driven from the planet, their forces scattered and broken. The Deathworlders stood victorious, their strength and tactics unrivaled. Yet even as the smoke from the battlefield began to clear and the last remnants of the invader forces were mopped up, the reality of the cost of this victory began to set in. Korath stood silently in the command center, his eyes focused on the display screens in front of him. The battle had been won, but at what price? The Deathworlders had lost many of their own in this brutal conflict. They had fought for their survival, for the planet's freedom, but now they had to rebuild. Ryler, ever loyal, approached Korath, sensing the unease in his commander. "General," Ryler said, his voice low but filled with respect, "the enemy has been defeated. But you're thinking about the losses we've suffered, aren't you?" Korath nodded, his face hardening with resolve. "Victory comes at a cost, Captain. The blood of our brothers and sisters stains this ground. We've saved the planet, but it feels like a hollow win." Ryler remained silent for a moment, understanding the burden that weighed heavily on their leader. "The Exenari people are safe because of us. That will never be forgotten. They will honor our fallen warriors." Korath turned to face Ryler, his gaze filled with pride. "They will, but we cannot forget the pain. The sacrifices made will echo through our history. We will rebuild, but we will never forget." The two Deathworlders stood together, looking out over the vast cityscape that had once been a war zone. Now it was a place of quiet restoration, though it would take time for the scars of war to heal. The Deathworlders knew they were not only warriors but also survivors and healers. Across the battlefield, the Exenari people began the difficult task of rebuilding. They had witnessed the Deathworlders' incredible power and feared them at first, but now they understood the true depth of their strength. The Deathworlders were not just merciless conquerors, they were saviors. They had given everything to free this planet from the invader scourge. In the days following the battle, the Deathworlders helped the Exenari rebuild their infrastructure. They used their advanced technology and knowledge to assist in restoring the damaged cities and communities. What the invaders had destroyed, the Deathworlders would help to restore. There was a deep sense of camaraderie between the two races now. The Exenari knew that without the Deathworlders, their world would have fallen. However, not all was peaceful. Among the wreckage, whispers began to spread of the Deathworlders' immense power. Some planets in the galaxy began to fear that the Deathworlders would now turn their attention toward them. The tales of their destructive tactics and cold efficiency in battle spread like wildfire, and rumors of future conquests began to circulate. Korath knew that the galaxy would watch them closely now. His warriors had proved their might, but their reputation would be a double-edged sword. Allies would now look to them with respect, while enemies would view them with fear. The question was, would they be able to manage their newfound power? Back in the war room, Korath began to make plans for the future. The Deathworlders had not come to conquer the galaxy. Their purpose had always been survival. Yet, the galaxy's eyes were now trained on them. There was no turning back from this point. "Ryler," Korath said, his voice heavy with the weight of leadership, "we've won the war, but we have to prepare for the future. We need to make sure our victory doesn't come at the expense of more lives." Ryler nodded solemnly. "We will build, General. We will ensure the peace, no matter what." As the days turned into weeks, the Deathworlders stayed vigilant. They were no longer fighting for survival. Now they fought for something greater, the preservation of peace. But peace was fragile, and every race in the galaxy knew it. The Deathworlders, for all their strength, could not guarantee peace forever. They had earned their place in the galaxy, but now they needed to ensure that the future would not be defined by the violence they had once been forced to endure. The invader forces were gone, but new challenges lay ahead. Political factions began to stir, and whispers of rebellion echoed in the corners of the galaxy. The Deathworlders had secured the Exenari world, but would their influence extend beyond this planet? Or would they be seen as a threat by others? For now, the Deathworlders and the Exenari stood united, their shared history of war and peace binding them together. The Deathworlders had left an indelible mark on the galaxy, and as the sun set over the once bloodied battlefield, the warriors knew that they had forged a future, one that they could protect, one that would honor the sacrifices made. But one question remained. What would be their next challenge in a galaxy that was no longer content with their simple survival? Would the Deathworlders rise to become the galaxy's new protectors, Or would they once again find themselves fighting for their lives? For now, the Deathworlders were content with their victory, but they knew that peace, like war, was fleeting, and they would be ready for whatever came next, a new kind of battle. The war was over, but the Deathworlders had learned a harsh truth. The fight for survival wasn't the only battle they would face. The scars of war, both physical and psychological, ran deep. The galaxy had witnessed their terrifying might, but as the Deathworlders began to rebuild, a new challenge arose, a battle of trust, diplomacy, and unity. On the surface, everything seemed peaceful. The Exenari people had been saved, their cities were slowly being reconstructed, and the Deathworlders were working hard to assist with the recovery. Yet beneath the surface, tensions brewed. Fear was a powerful force, and as the Deathworlders' reputation spread across the galaxy, the whispers of their power turned into something darker. Korath stood in a quiet room within the newly reconstructed command center, his gaze fixed on the holographic map of the galaxy. The Deathworlders were not just warriors anymore. They were leaders. The task of governing and maintaining peace now weighed heavily on his shoulders. "We have won the battle, but we haven't won their trust," Rylor, Korath muttered, his voice heavy with the burden of leadership. Rylor stood beside him, his face grim. "The galaxy is full of fear, General. We might be saviors today, but what about tomorrow? What happens when the memory of our strength fades and new threats rise?" Korath didn't answer immediately. His thoughts were a whirlwind. He had always known that the Deathworlders' power could either be a blessing or a curse. Now that they had proven themselves in battle, they would need to ensure they didn't become the very thing they had fought against, the oppressors. The Galactic Council, composed of numerous species and factions, was already in turmoil. While some saw the Deathworlders as allies to be relied upon, others viewed them with suspicion. Would the Deathworlders continue to fight for peace, or would they turn their power on the rest of the galaxy? Korath had made it clear that the Deathworlders were not conquerors. They fought to survive, to protect, and to defend the weak. But there were too many who couldn't see beyond the strength of their armies. The council's meeting was called, and Korath found himself facing representatives from multiple species, each one with their own fears and questions. The room was tense, filled with distrust. As the representatives filed in, Korath could see it in their eyes, the fear that the Deathworlders might one day turn against them. General Korath, one of the council members, a towering Exelon, spoke first. His voice was deep and wary. "We've seen your power. Your warriors have crushed the invaders with an efficiency we've never witnessed before. Tell us, do you plan to extend this power beyond the Exenari world?" The question hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Korath held his gaze steady, meeting the eyes of every representative in the room. "We don't seek to rule," Korath replied, his tone calm but firm. "Our people have fought and bled for our survival. We seek only peace, but we won't stand by and let others suffer at the hands of those who would harm them. We will protect, but we will not oppress." The room was silent for a moment, the tension palpable. Then another voice, a slender Corellian diplomat, spoke. "How can we trust you? How do we know you won't turn on us when the time comes? Your strength is undeniable, but so is your history of survival at any cost." Rylor, standing beside Korath, clenched his fists. He wanted to lash out, to defend their honor, but Korath held up a hand, signaling him to remain calm. "We understand your fear," Korath said slowly, "and we respect it. We are a species built on strength and survival, but that does not mean we will rule by fear. We have no desire to control the galaxy. We fight for peace, not domination." But the seeds of doubt had been planted. As the meeting continued, it became clear that the Deathworlders would have to prove their commitment to peace. The galaxy had been changed forever by their intervention. But was that change for the better? Or would it be a source of conflict and division in the years to come? As the meeting drew to a close, Korath knew that their next challenge had already begun. The Deathworlders would need to prove themselves to the galaxy, not through war, but through diplomacy, trust, and unity. The real battle was no longer on the battlefield. It was a battle of ideas, of fear versus hope. Rylor looked at Korath, sensing his unease. "What now, General?" Korath's gaze remained fixed on the galaxy map before him, his mind racing. "Now we show them who we truly are. It won't be easy. The fight for peace will be harder than any battle we've ever fought." The Deathworlders had emerged victorious from the war, but now they were entering a new kind of battle, a battle of trust, diplomacy, and the struggle to prove that their strength could be a force for good in a galaxy filled with fear. And Korath knew that this battle would not be won with weapons, but with actions, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to protect the innocent. The Deathworlders had proved their strength, but now it was time to prove their hearts. The future of the Deathworlders. The dust of war had settled. The galactic battlefield was silent, and the Deathworlders had proven themselves not just as warriors, but as protectors. But as Korath stood before the assembly of the Galactic Council once more, he knew that the fight was far from over. The hardest challenge still lay ahead, earning the trust of a galaxy that had known nothing but fear of their power. The Deathworlders had come to save the Xanari, but their victory had raised more questions than answers. Could they be trusted to protect the galaxy, or would they one day decide to conquer it? Korath knew that the galaxy's view of them was as fragile as glass, and a single wrong move could shatter the fragile peace they had fought so hard to build. But it wasn't just Korath who understood the stakes. Rylor, his closest ally and fellow Deathworlder, stood by his side, his face a mask of resolve. "They won't make this easy," Rylor murmured. "Some will never believe we're anything more than soldiers." Korath nodded, his eyes steady as he surveyed the room filled with diplomats, leaders, and representatives of various species. The weight of their stares bore down on him. They were all waiting for something, waiting to see if the Deathworlders could truly change, or if they would return to their old ways of survival by force. As the council session began, a Corellian leader stood up. Her species, known for their keen intellect and sharp political maneuvering, had long been wary of the Deathworlders. "General Korath," she began, her voice measured but firm, "we've seen what your people are capable of. The question now is whether you are capable of leading a galaxy that doesn't fear you." Korath met her gaze without flinching. "Our strength is not just in our ability to fight, but in our ability to protect," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "We've come to the table not as conquerors, but as allies. We seek peace, but we will not hesitate to defend it." The words hung in the air, but Korath knew that they were only part of the equation. The Deathworlders had proven their might, but now they needed to show that their power would be used wisely and with restraint. It was a delicate dance of diplomacy, one that required patience and trust. Another representative, a towering Exelan warrior, spoke next. His species had long been distrustful of the Deathworlders, seeing them as a threat to the delicate balance of power within the galaxy. "You speak of peace, General Korath, but how do we know you won't turn on us when it suits you? Your people are strong, but strength alone does not guarantee peace." Korath felt the familiar stirrings of frustration, but he kept his expression neutral. "We do not seek to dominate," he said, his voice calm but filled with an undeniable intensity. "We seek to defend those who cannot defend themselves. We've fought for survival, but we now fight for something greater: unity, trust, and a future where no one has to live in fear." The room was quiet for a moment as the representatives absorbed his words. Some nodded, others remained unmoved, but one thing was clear: the Deathworlders had a long road ahead of them. After the session concluded, Korath and Rylor walked side by side through the grand halls of the council chambers. The silence between them spoke volumes, but neither man needed words to understand the gravity of the situation. "They are watching us closely," Rylor said finally, his tone thoughtful. "Every decision we make will be scrutinized." Korath nodded. "And we will show them that we can be more than just soldiers. We will show them that we are leaders. We will show them that our strength is for the good of all." As they walked toward their ship, Korath gazed out at the stars. The war had been won, but the real battle was only just beginning. The Deathworlders were no longer just a force of destruction. They were a force for change. But in a galaxy built on fear and distrust, change was a hard pill to swallow. Korath knew that their future was uncertain, but he was determined to lead his people down a path of peace. He had seen what they were capable of, both in battle and in kindness. The galaxy had witnessed their strength, but now it was time for them to witness their humanity. The Deathworlders had risen to the challenge of saving a world, and now they would rise to the challenge of saving a galaxy. It would take time, effort, and above all, trust. But with every step they took, they would prove that their strength could be a force for good. And as Korath looked to the stars, he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, the Deathworlders would stand united, strong, resilient, and unwavering in their commitment to protect those who needed it most. The galaxy had seen their might, but it was time for them to see their hearts, and that Korath knew would be the true test of their strength.